Hello, and welcome to the Fantasy Rewind podcast. I'm your co-host, Dylan Stoll, and I'm joined as always by my friend, Michael Whifford.
Hello.
And today, we are going to be talking about House of the Dragon Episode 3. So, this one is titled, Second of His Name. Before we get into the discussion of the episode here, we're going to give out the typical reminders. If you want to get in contact with the show, you can send us an email, which is fantasyrewindpod@gmail.com. You can get at us on Twitter, too, if you want. That is @fantasyrewind. And then on Instagram, we are @fantasyrewindpod. Love to talk fantasy with anybody that wants to. Get in contact with us, and we'll send you some stickers. All right, so without any farther ado, Mike, let's dive right into this episode. What did you think of episode 3, Second of His Name?
Oh, man, I was waiting for an episode like this where we had some action, right? I feel like everyone's sort of been waiting. You know, we had the jousting in episode 1, but that's been really about it.
Yeah.
So, this was really good, and crabs on the menu, right?
Crabs on the menu, boys, yes. So this episode, in my opinion, was my favorite of the season so far for House of the Dragon as well. And I just loved how it was pretty much split into these two arcs that were just very separate, but still very enjoyable, both of them. And I
feel like they were very related, you know?
They were related in the sense that like they kind of flowed from one right into the other. But while it was happening, I liked how it was a closet episode where like everything was happening within like a self-contained area, then it moved to another self-contained area. And like the theming of both of them is very similar, I guess, if you think about that way. But yeah, all in all,
that's where I wanted to get.
Okay,
that's where I wanted to get to. Is the theming is you had in the one with Rhaenyra and the other with Daemon, right?
Yes.
And in both, I feel like the theme was that they're moving on from the king in some ways or respect. They're growing in their own sort of roles. And sort of apart from him.
Yeah, I mean, I thought that one thing that was done very well in this episode, just overall, was the king. I thought that he was done very well, and he was actually my favorite character of the episode, which I think this is the second time I've said that, because I think I said the same thing for episode 2. But yeah, King Viserys is rocking it and is quickly becoming one of my favorite characters on the show here. And in this one here, what really spoke to me about like his performance and like why he was my favorite was just how troubled he was, how expressive he was with his troubles, and just like little things along the way that kind of were swaying him one way or the other as far as like who he should name heir, who he should marry Rhaenyra to, all of that. And it was just done in such a way where I felt like it was very believable that he was having sleepless nights about these decisions. And so I really enjoyed the portrayal of King Viserys in this episode.
Yeah, let's stick with him for a little bit. Because I think it's really interesting, some of the things that happened and kind of the interactions with other people, right?
Right,
so he realizes that some people just want to get Rhaenyra, so they're getting closer to the crown, right?
Exactly.
Like our favorite, everyone's favorite house, the Lannisters, which I was just like, what a great portrayal, right?
Fit right in.
Yeah, he did. And then you have his advisor come up, and he's drinking at that point, and he's just like, oh, let me guess, you want me to... She should marry your son. And he's like, no, your honor. She should marry the sea snake son and mend your guys' relationship. Which I thought was really like a clever kind of way to transition over there after they talked about it. And it actually would make sense too, but at the end he kind of is like, marry whoever you want. Shore up your line.
Right, like people are worried about secession. That's been like a very common theme throughout the last couple generations of Targaryens. They worried about it with Viserys' predecessor Jaehaerys, and they worried about it with Viserys now as well, since he doesn't have any male heirs. So
Well,
he's
now
like,
he has one, maybe two coming.
well, one as of now, Aegon, second of his name, which we'll talk about shortly. But before he married Alicent Hightower, he had no male heirs. So his succession was in doubt as well. That's why like Daemon was his appointed heir, and then he's like, no, Daemon, I'm going to give this to Rhaenyra after all. But yeah, I thought that what we saw with the king this episode was that struggle between being a king and being a good father and being a good man. And I feel like the people around the king know that Viserys is a weak king. And he has admitted himself, I feel like, that he's a weak king. But he always, it seems, tries to be a good man. And I feel like Alicent used that to her advantage when talking to the king. Like saying like, oh, you're a good father. This is what a good father would do. Or this is what a good man would do. When he asked like why he would send soldiers to the Stepstones to help out Daemon. And she's like, because you're a good man. Do this thing. Like playing to his own weaknesses and like using the political intrigue that we like to see in Game of Thrones properties, and the manipulation that happens with those, using that against him. And I felt like that just showed a nice duality and showed that while Viserys has weak points, as in being a ruler, he does still have points where you can get behind him as just the man itself.
Yeah. Let's talk about his wife a little bit more, because I'm a little torn on her.
Okay.
So, like you were just saying, it seemed like she was manipulating him there to get him to send forces to the Stepstones, but her real goal was probably to get him to name their son the heir, right?
Right, yeah.
But she has a very weird dynamic because she's friends, or was friends, with Rhaenyra.
Was friends, yes.
And I feel like she doesn't really want to push Viserys into these things, but it's more like she's just being dutiful to her dad and their house.
And see, this is a big departure of what happens in Fire and Blood versus what happens, or what is happening in the show here. Because in the show, we're kind of seeing Alicent being manipulated by her father. And her father and the rest of the Hightowers, like you saw Otto Hightower's brother kind of telling him, oh, you got to get your grandson named heir. Like, forget about Rhaenyra, get Aegon named heir. It's just a matter of time. And then so he took that criticism, and then he gave that same criticism down to Alicent, and now Alicent's working her weaves on the king there. Whereas in Fire and Blood, Alicent herself is very cunning and very intelligent, and is using her own capabilities to maneuver politically and get what she wants. So it's a little bit of a departure from the character we know in Fire and Blood, but
I'd still say she's intelligent and she's manipulative, but
it's at the behest, though, of her father in the show.
Yeah, so I feel like they're trying to make her more likable in that regard. Maybe not like this, like the queen from Game of Thrones, Lannister.
Cersei?
Yeah, thank you, Cersei. I feel like maybe they're trying to differentiate her from her,
Oh, she's definitely very different from Cersei. I feel like in Fire and Blood, Alicent isn't like nearly as cruel and nearly as like full of herself as Cersei is when she's introduced in Game of Thrones and throughout that series there in the Song of Ice and Fire. But I do think that I want to highlight just how intelligent and how cunning and manipulative Alicent is on her own and the source material, because I don't want her to seem like a puppet of a character. Because I think that she can stand on her own as far as her own ambition and everything, and would be doing what she is doing now without her father kind of pushing her. But that's neither here nor there, because in the show we see Otto Hightower being the puppet master behind Alicent. But I'm wondering if we're going to see her break free of those strings as well.
I feel like we will, and I feel like there's pieces missing to her too. I don't think we're getting the whole picture of her yet.
Yeah. I tend to agree with you there. I feel like it's still early in the season, and it's only season 1 as well. So
Yeah.
we have 3 episodes in, and lots of time for Alicent to stake her own claim and to be like, I'm a major player within this game. So talking about some of the other things that we see here, like the major theme of the first half of the episode is Rhaenyra dealing with the repercussions of her brother or half-brother Aegon Targaryen being born. Now, Aegon is Viserys' first son, so a lot of people, as the king is reminded, assume he's going to be heir. Now, the name Aegon is really important because Aegon the Conqueror is like the fabled Targaryen that rode his dragon from Valyria over to Westeros, took Dragonstone, and then ended up conquering Westeros. So naming his son Aegon puts the weight of that name on this new little boy. Because everyone's like, oh, Aegon the Conqueror's returned, Aegon the Second. Like, they're kind of using his name as a rallying cry to signify, like, strength within the Targaryen house, strength within the succession line, and just using it to kind of send a message to the houses that we are strong, we are the conquerors, like, we are here to play.
We have dragons.
Yeah, we got dragons. We're going to roll over you with them if you try to rebel. And I love how when Viserys is confronted by the one Lannister character there about Aegon becoming the heir and not Rhaenyra, how he's like, it's your duty as a steward of the West to put down rebellion. And he's like, oh, no, not rebellion. There's no rebellion going on here. We support you.
We just assumed.
Yeah.
That he was going to make him, make him king, like you said, or make him heir, right?
Make him heir, yeah.
I think there was a really interesting element to the whole hunt that I kind of wanted to talk about too, and
Definitely.
It was the king of the forest, the white stag, right?
Yes.
And how they were like, oh, we found it was very symbolic,
Very symbolic.
kind of out there for us for obvious reasons, but like the king had all these people corner this stag. And it doesn't end up being the king, right? It ends up being this imposter, which I feel like is a symbology for him, right? Almost like an imposter king. He's very weak, right? And then you see Rhaenyra, and she sees the actual king of the wood. And I feel like they're really trying to pump up this whole, she's more fit than him. And her coming back into the camp after having to, after running away and kind of staying out in the woods for the night, obviously being so upset with her dad, and that boar attacks her, and the night
and her Kingsguard.
Yeah,
Sir Criston Cole.
Yes, Sir Criston Cole, which obviously there's supposed to be some tension there between them, right?
For sure, yeah, for sure.
But her killing that boar with her bare hands, coming into camp with that boar, and the people, I couldn't tell really from the other people's faces if they were impressed or...
I feel like they took note. I don't know if they were impressed that she comes back to the camp covered in blood and just walking proudly down the line, with the boar in tow behind her. Now, I will say, I thought that was a nice contrasting happening between what King Viserys did in his hunt, where he had everyone hold it still for him to stab,
and it was being told where to stab and everything.
Right, very pampered, very artificial in the hunt itself, versus Rhaenyra when she takes down this boar that really Sir Criston should get half credit or 3/4 credit for killing that thing, because he took it down, it was laying down there, it started to get back up, and that's when Rhaenyra jumped on it and just started stabbing it repeatedly, having a cathartic moment of release of all the anger she's had for her father, for her situation, for all of that coming out. But I thought that, again, when you mentioned the symbology between the stag versus the white stag there, that was like the king of the wood, that was so blatant, and like, Rhaenyra's the one. She should be queen. However, what I want to say is, if that's the argument they're trying to make, they need to not make Rhaenyra as angsty. And I feel like this is something like I'm seeing portrayed on Rings of Power with Galadriel, as well as here in House of the Dragon with Rhaenyra. So
but I
Rhaenyra,
feel like
well, hold on a second.
like this is going to be a moment where she starts to transform, right?
I
This
hope
episode
so.
on.
I hope so, because Rhaenyra, why I'm so like bothered by this part of it is because we had another time jump here, which we didn't talk about yet. But there was a time jump of about 3 years from episode 2 to episode 3 here in House of the Dragon. And so over the course of those 3 years, Rhaenyra has been pushed to the side, basically, whether she did that pushing herself, as we saw early on in this episode, where she was like removing herself from court, hanging out in the God's Woods, listening to the bard play her the same tune over and over again, not wanting to do anything with the family, not wanting to go on this political trip to the Kingswood for a symbolic hunt of her brother's second birthday. All of this stuff, like, she's giving the people no reason to have faith in her that she will be a good heir. Whether that's because she sees it that her father's constantly trying to replace her, or it's because she's a woman, or all of the above. I felt like Rhaenyra, while she had reason to like be worried, I feel like, because of what was going on with Aegon and everything, I felt like she took it too far in removing herself from her own duties and not giving the people reason to trust her.
Well, I might disagree with you a little bit on that, because as she said, he's trying to replace her with an heir, right? And we've kind of gotten that vibe. But think about, too, all the other men on the council. Anytime she's tried to share her opinion that we saw in the last episode, find her something to do, right? And so it's became very obvious. That's probably just continued, right? So how are you supposed to fill a role when you're not even allowed to like have any input on it or try things or say anything, when your opinion isn't even valued?
Yeah, I get that.
Yeah, I feel like her feelings are definitely justified, and especially when, now the wife of the king is the Hand's daughter. The Hand is probably undermining her in a lot of ways, which he already was anyway.
Yeah, I mean, again, I understand that, but I still just feel like she's had, like, the people have no reason to believe in her. Like, she has nothing going on to, like, make her a legitimate heir as far as, like, in the people's eyes. And whether that's being forced on her from the council or her own choosing of removing herself, it's probably a little bit of both. And because we saw, right, like you said, in episode 2, she was speaking up at a small council meeting, so she kind of got assigned to go choose a new Kingsguard. But it's really difficult, and this is one of the downsides of the way they're doing the show. It's really difficult to know what's happening because we're not seeing it. Because it is the time jump. Because what that time jump does is it advances the plot, but at the cost of knowing how character development is working, knowing what's going on, and being able to kind of know from episode to episode, whether it's a 1-day time jump is fine, like that's typical or whatever. But when you jump 3 whole years, like, you're left to wonder, like, what has been happening to Rhaenyra over these last 3 years? And so that's where, like, it leaves it up to interpretation, and it makes it so unclear that you can't really have a concrete answer.
Yeah, I think you hit it right there. That time jump, that's what I was thinking about when you were saying, like, we haven't seen her do anything or, like, reach the people. We don't know what she's done.
Right.
We're getting these very, like, microscopic views at her life. And so we can only take what we've seen in these and extrapolate it. And so I think that's really where it has done kind of a disservice to the characters. And I feel like right now it's been okay with the king, but not for her and not for Daemon.
Right, I would agree with you there. Before we transition into talking about Daemon, the one more thing I want to talk about is going back to that stag moment here, where when the king first heard that it was a white hart out in the woods, which was like the symbology or symbol of royalty in Westeros before the dragons came, the hand says to him, "On today of all days," like imagine that. And so, as we've seen Viserys, he has been one to believe in symbols, been one to believe in superstitions. He believed in his dream of having a son with a golden crown on his head that he had when he was younger. And he reveals to Alicent in this episode that the greatest gift of Targaryens isn't the dragon. It's that some Targaryens have prophetic visions and are able to see the future through certain means. And he's like, what's a dragon compared to the ability to dream, basically? Because they're called dreamers. So we know that Viserys is susceptible to like these mystical ideas. And I feel like when you see him hearing about the White Stag, all the events leading up to him actually killing the stag there, he's like, oh my gosh, like, is this like the gods telling me Aegon should be my heir? And he's questioning himself, wondering if he made the wrong decision. And then when he finally does get to the hunting part where he kills the stag and sees it's just a stag, it's not anything special, he almost has like this sigh of relief and then questions his questioning and kind of comes back down on Rhaenyra's side and has that tender heart-to-heart moment with her at the end of this part of the episode where he's like, I vow to you on your mother's memory, I am not trying to replace you. I love you, you're my daughter, you're going to be the queen of Westeros when I'm done, and doing everything in his power to reassure Rhaenyra of her position. And like, I felt like that was a really nice moment.
Oh yeah, I love that interaction between them, because I feel like that was, like I said before, mending the bridge. Hopefully now she can move on from being angsty.
Yeah. So jumping now into Daemon's.
Until I think he gets murdered and his kid gets named heir from the Queen Regent. And yeah, I feel like there's going to be some politicking happening. Maybe a note left by him or some nonsense, you know?
We'll see what happens.
You don't like my theories?
We'll see. I mean, I know what happens. So at least I know what happens in
true.
Fire and Blood. So I'm not going to comment too far on.
That's fair. It's like that. When you had theories in Sandman and I would listen to them and nod politely.
So let's jump over to Daemon here. And
I had some questions for you about this.
Yeah,
I want to start with. So it was really interesting. One, the sea snake has like actually a pretty vast family.
Right. Yeah, he's a very really big and ancient house as well. So House Valyrian is a powerful house.
Yeah. And they're getting stumped by these people in caves, which makes sense because if they bring men in, they can just... Well, I guess I didn't understand why they couldn't have found another way to do this, right? They had the dragons overhead just shooting fire at the caves, and then they just go in, they just go in, and if they're in caves, those caves end, correct?
Well, I'll just say this, using a real world analogy, if you think about what happened when the US military invaded Afghanistan and the Taliban went into the caves there, you know, it's not always the quote unquote superior military might that can do that. When you know your terrain, when you know your own environment there, that gives you an advantage. And by hiding in the caves, it takes away the greatest weapon of the opposing force, which is the dragon.
Well, this is where I was thinking, like, why didn't they just have the dragon like drop rocks into the front of the cave, or like, you know, cave in some of the caves so that way they got trapped in there, you know?
Because of plot. But
that's neither here nor there. I guess that's just me sort of like galaxy branding it. I did have another observation though that I thought was really interesting was that there's more than just Daemon and Rhaenyra as dragon riders.
Yes. So you got to remember that Princess Rhaenys, who is Corlys Valerian's wife, was the other option for the heir to the Iron Throne instead of Viserys. So she has her own dragon, Rhaenys does. Her children have Targaryen blood. They would be given dragon eggs at their birth. And so you see her son there. I forget his name. Oh my gosh, I know it starts with an L. But you see Corlys Valerian and Rhaenys' son riding a dragon, being a dragon riding commander in the army here. And that is the character that the one King's Council member was proposing Rhaenyra marries.
Interesting. It's just, I guess I never thought about how, like, you know, we're only used to seeing one Targaryen, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so
During this time, there's many Targaryens, or at least, you know, multiple. Not many, maybe, but.
So it'll be interesting to see kind of what happens as we continue forward, like what other Targaryen houses there might be.
Yeah.
Like, even if they're slightly removed. And, like, it'd be really neat if they got into a little bit more of, like, who gets a dragon and who doesn't, right? Like, and also, too, not all of them grow up to be dragon riders.
Very true.
So what happens if, like, they put if dragon eggs in there with them and it doesn't hatch, then they're not a dragon rider, right? I guess
Pretty
that's
much,
kinda how it
yeah.
is.
So it's Laenor Valerian is the name of the son there. And
Okay.
so just going to what you were talking about there, remember in episode 2 when Daemon said, "Oh, I'm married again. I'm having a baby again. I took this dragon egg to do this." They were like, no, Daemon. That's not how this is going to work. So I feel like the exception, because it's usually just Targaryens that get it, but the exception was probably made for Laenor Valerian here because of who his mother was at the time. She was either the queen that never was, or the heir to the Iron Throne, where she was the daughter of Jaehaerys and everything. So we will explore that a little bit more if it's fleshed out farther, depending on who does and does not have more babies and in the season here. But that is a very good point to bring up.
And we don't know if Aegon has a dragon or not.
Oh yes, we don't technically know that yet. That is very true. Has not been announced, but how it typically works is the egg is placed in the cradle with the child, and like because of that, they kind of form like a bond, like through, you know, mystical means and everything, and go from there. But getting into what actually happens in this part of the episode, I thought it was important to note that this is again 3 years after the last episode, and Daemon and Corlys Valerian have basically become stuck in this quagmire that they cannot win, and despite their superior military might, they're stuck. They can't wipe out the crab feeder. All they can do is like do little random skirmish attacks and then get sent away by a hail of arrows. And I thought that this part here was very interesting when how Daemon reacted to the news that his brother was going to be sending forces. So what was like your impression of that part, that scene?
Obviously, like, he just has the resentment towards his brother seems to have grown, and I want to know why. Like, I knew they were in like a weird space in the last episode, but I didn't know it was to the point of downright I would rather die than accept help from you type deal.
Right. He just looks at it as like this gigantic slight to like himself, to his honor, to like his perceived station, because he views himself as like, I should be king next. Like, I'm your brother, I was your original heir, like you cast me out and supplanted me, and kind of like the council is doing for Rhaenyra here. The council in the show here has done something similar to Daemon, where they put him from place to place to place because of how cruel Daemon can be, how much he demands out of the people. And his reaction of basically saying, I'd rather die than accept help from you. Like, this is my moment, my glory. I started this war, basically, to assert my claim to the Iron Throne. And he's like, I cannot let the Iron Throne and my brother be the ones that settle this. I need to do this. So, like, that's why he goes off on the messenger. That's why he goes on this suicidal mission to try to single-handedly take out the crab feeder, which is successful. But all of that was stemming from the need for him to succeed.
Yeah. And I liked how... loved the action there and Daemon running in. Now, I think he probably would have died, honestly. Like,
probably, yes. If we're being honest, yeah.
all those arrows, like, I'm sorry, like, you'd be dead. But it was really cool. I wish we had kind of seen his, interaction with the crab feeder. Because, like, I never got the impression that the crab feeder was strong in any way, shape, or form.
I don't know if you noticed this or not, but the crab feeder never had any spoken dialogue. So, like, the reason they didn't show it is because it was basically already settled as soon as the battle started. Like, you knew Daemon was going to win. There was no way this character who has not said a sentence is going to kill Daemon. So, ignoring that part and focusing on the rest of the battle where you're seeing cool visual effects and an awesome fight sequence going on, and then seeing Daemon just dragging the severed torso of the crab feeder out of the caves, covered in blood, just like, I thought that was a very, very cool way to do it. And I thought that it would have been a waste to, like, make us fear that Daemon was going to die, because we all knew he wasn't going to.
Well, I didn't think he was going to die, but I would have almost liked just a little bit of, like, a villain speech narrating kind of why he was doing what he was doing type deal. Maybe trying to sway Daemon not to kill him, and Daemon thinking about it and then just cutting him in half or something. Just maybe a little bit of that. But you're right, it was very visually appealing the way they did it. That's just me because I want to just know everything. So yeah. Overall, though, this is probably my favorite episode of the season so far.
Agreed.
I think we had a lot of really cool developments, and I think it's going to really catapult us. Hopefully not forward another 3 years, but,
Yeah, no, I'm very interested to see, like, if we do have another time jump here, because we're getting to the point where we're getting close to the opening moves of the dance, and the more we're watching this, the more episodes that keep coming out, the more I'm thinking we're going to get there before the start of the season, before the end of the season. And I think that next episode will start to reveal some very interesting things going on here. But again, I'm going to be interested to see, like, if we have more time jumps or not.
Do you know how many episodes are going to be this season?
I would assume 10. I don't know for a fact. I'll look it up, though, and we can talk about that another time if you want.
It's all good. Don't have to worry about it. I was curious if you knew off the top of your head there. But, yeah, overall, House of the Dragon has been good so far. Really liked the progression. Not such a big fan of the time jump, but love the acting. Matt Smith is killing it.
Oh, absolutely. So there are going to be 10 episodes for House of the Dragon Season 1. And I completely agree with everything you just said. I think that the time jump is one of the more annoying things about the series so far. But Matt Smith, the actress that plays Rhaenyra, the actor that plays King Viserys, they're all very strong.
The wife of the king, too, I feel like is, like, in her own way, a very strong actress, too. Very coming across as, like, caring and motherly, and I think there's going to be a little bit more steel behind her than we realize, but we'll see.
All right, so with all of that, this is going to be Two Nerds signing off. See ya.
Goodbye.